So quickly, if we could just go around. My name's Jeremy Miller. I work on a little Ethereum project called Consensus. I'm also the founding board member of the. Hello. Hi, my name's Jeremy Miller. I work on a little Ethereum project called Consensus, and I'm the founding board member of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. And with me we have Casey, Kieran, and Eric, who will quickly introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the meat of it.
Sure. Can I be heard? Yeah. Casey Kuhlman, I'm the CEO of Monax.
Kieran James Leuven, Chief Product Officer, founder of Block Apps, first company incubated by Consensus, and also EA board member.
And Eric Pisini from Deloitte, leading blockchain activities. And we just announced today that we are joining the EEA.
So 3 EEA members. So since this is the Business of Blockchain panel, one thing that I'd be interested to know is how is each of your blockchain businesses going, and how have you seen them changed over the last 12 months?
Sure. We've really been exploring a whole range of different use cases in the very early days. And one thing that we've really been focusing on from a customer perspective and a business development perspective is honing in on from a broad range of use case into some very early use cases where we think you can show value at scale. So that's where we've seen, from our perspective, a narrowing of focus from a broad exploration in the early days of a whole wide variety of use cases into a more focused delivery style.
Yeah, so for those that don't know, Block Apps is an independent software platform vendor, and what we've started to notice in the last few months are lots of strong market indicators. We're getting much more serious production interest. We do have production systems running, both with from Fortune 500s down to actually a surprising number of startups. So one really positive market indicator that we're getting is we have small 10, 15-person companies asking us for service level agreements, production grade support, and so on. So I think the timescale for wide-scale production adoption of the Ethereum core technology and value-add services that vendors like us provide is really quite short. Call it inside this year, we'll see quite a number of systems come online.
Yeah, and I think finally what we've been seeing over the last few months is probably 3 things. One is going completely outside of the US for us. So we are actually doing more today outside of the US than we were doing a year ago. Number one. Number two is outside of financial services. So we have a lot of activities moving into life science, healthcare, oil and gas, supply chain, and we used to have only FSI clients. And then finally, we are moving what we call down market. So we used to have clients in the Fortune 500, and now with blockchain activities, we are going down market. We are addressing a larger market because of that blockchain activities that we have. So very 3 expansions, different types of expansions.
And as we see the market mature and expand, and particularly when I think down market, I think about potentially organizations that don't have an Alex Batlin or don't have an Amber, maybe slightly less staffed technical organizations. What key questions are you getting from clients when it comes to protocols, Ethereum, the various other noise that's out there about which platform to use? Kieran, you want to take that first?
Sure, certainly. So I think for the folks that you mentioned are sort of leading the way, the Alexes, the Ambers of the world, in terms of putting a very powerful brand out there and saying that Ethereum is real. In particular, blockchain technology is real, and we're going to run it in production relatively soon. And that's leading the rest of the market in financial services, but in all other industries, to take the technology a little bit more seriously. But the down market needs a little bit more in the way of, say, executive education, run the next round of proof of concepts and that sort of thing. And they're kind of getting to the stage where they're ready to start making those investments, where those early leaders have already done so.
But when the debate comes down to Ethereum versus other technologies, what sort of questions are you getting?
Yeah. The biggest is, so a lot of the understanding out there about the public network, some of the incidents that have happened there. A lot of people are starting to look at it as a good thing to have a public network, and that it's a very hostile environment to test the security of the protocol. And the second is a lot around vendor lock-in. So especially as most of the Ethereum companies are not enormous, part of the role of the EEA is to say you're not betting on a single vendor stack. Even if it's open source, you're betting on an ecosystem in which we've standardized at least the core protocol layer, so many vendors can come in and provide commercial grade of support, also services on top, and et cetera.
Yeah, so one thing we see is kind of a divergence of philosophy as to how you should approach application building. So if you come from the very rich fabric that the Ethereum virtual machine can provide, you think about building applications from a certain manner. If you come from a more tokenized blockchain design, you think about building them in a different manner entirely. And you look at building your rule suites and business logic typically off-chain in using wallets and restricting access to keys. Whereas with the Ethereum virtual machine, you can provide a much more rich fabric around rules-based access control, roles management, and other necessities when you're building industrial applications. So typically the application or the questions that we get are coming from this perspective of how should I think about, from an architectural perspective, building my application if I'm going to be leveraging Ethereum style technologies versus other styles of technologies.
Yeah, so what I would add to that is, I think that notion of vendor locking that you mentioned is very important for our clients, right? Because not only they don't want to be stuck with one platform, one technology, but they don't want to be stuck with one vendor. And the vendor is important because a lot of you guys are very small. We were talking about that at lunch. The guarantee that you're gonna be around in 5 years is not 100%. You guys, yes, but maybe not everybody. So the challenge is, how do I make a decision today? And I think the Alliance is providing that level of comfort that they will get support, whatever the technology they use within the Alliance, they will get support by one of the players. I think that's a very important piece.
And to pick up, and we'll go in a slightly different order than the way we wrote down the questions. In terms of maturity, as you're going through these dialogues, and Eric, maybe we'll hear from you first on this one. What's the mix of education versus POC versus pilot versus production, and how is that mix evolving?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it depends on the industry. If you look at financial services, we are way beyond the education awareness phase now. I think now we are really moving into even beyond POC, and we are doing pilots, and we are launching products, with a piece of blockchain, not only on blockchain. So that's where we are with financial services. But if you go outside of financial services, some industries are just starting, and so you have to go back to the whiteboard and re-explain what is blockchain, what is the consensus mechanism. You guys are laughing because we thought we were done with this, right? And and we have to go back again. So I think it depends on the industry, clearly. Yeah.
Yeah, so from our perspective, something that's interesting that we're seeing is a huge proliferation of sort of vertically specific consortia. So BlockApps, we're not sort of subject matter experts in every vertical, obviously, 20-person software company. But what we're seeing is lots of different subject matter experts getting people at the table, doing some of the education with the whole industry at the same time, and then looking to someone like us or Monax to provide the technical infrastructure and some of the implementation.
We are experts in every vertical, so. No, I think we're all roughly in the same boat. Within financial services, you're sort of at the typically at the pilot stage or late proof of concept stage, depending on the individual actor and or the group and or asset class. Outside, you're typically in the late education, early proof of concept stage. And I think one thing that we haven't really talked about too much is the increasing, well, you talked about it a little bit, Kieran, but the increasing use by startups. So obviously this is the EEA, and we're mostly focused on the enterprise side. However, there's a whole range of startups that are really leveraging both a whole wide range of blockchain technologies, which is going to probably drive more acceleration on the enterprise side as well, particularly as those go faster to production.
So let's pick that up. I mean, obviously, fintech and regtech, which you guys are also a bit exposed to, have been booming for several years now. And if maybe you could explain for the audience, each of you, if you're doing something in fintech, let's put aside the big investment banks for a second, but if you're doing something more generally in fintech, why use a blockchain and why use Ethereum?
Hard to answer that in the abstract, but typically what we see is folks very interested in reducing what they have to prove as a platform or as a SaaS startup. And you can really leverage blockchain technology to have a supra-organizational proof. And obviously it'd be use case specific, but this is one of the big trends that we see at least.
So I would split it at least into two buckets. I think startups are much more willing to engage with the public network. We will see big financial institutions engage with it in the next year or two, but in a much more limited scale, where startups can come in and have the sort of risk profile in which they can go play with the technology there and actually build real businesses. I would also say that startups in fintech do have similar enterprise requirements that much larger companies do as they sell into those companies. And so the Ethereum protocol is, especially with the work that we're doing at EEA, has solved a lot of that for them in terms of having an auditable system that synchronizes systems of record. And so we've talked to a number of startups who do things like automate KYC processes, who might be, part of their work is on public Ethereum, part of it's private Ethereum, part of it's not Ethereum at all. But what the community has built is a faster route to market for a large class of fintech use cases.
Eric, Karen picked up on something that you mentioned earlier, which is blockchain being part of the solution. Do you want to, for people that haven't built large-scale blockchain systems, which probably are a couple of them in this room in the enterprise setting, maybe you want to explain a bit about that and what it means to build a blockchain in the context of enterprise architecture.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why we don't have large-scale implementations of blockchain today, is because doing a POC in a lab is kind of easy. Right? You're in your own environment. You don't have to integrate with any other technologies. You don't have to talk about the regulation aspect of this. As soon as you leave POC, you have to address all those topics. One of my favorite topics is you have to decide who's going to pick up the phone when something goes wrong, right? And we keep saying, okay, it's a blockchain, it's distributed, so you don't have to worry about the availability of the system. The answer is no, you do, because something is going to go wrong. Maybe not the blockchain itself, something else will go wrong. And that's where the architecture is very important. A blockchain will not live on its own. It will connect a lot of things, and those things have to be very well architectured when they talk to the blockchain. So to me, that's the architecture is central to moving away from POC and into production.
Do you want to talk about, Karen, in the BlockApp stack, you have some unique, maybe that's too strong a word, approaches for doing this type of integration. Do you want to talk about some of the challenges that you've seen and how you've managed to overcome them?
Certainly. So we're sort of just seeing the time in the market where people actually do legacy transformations and move the technology over to something blockchain-based. However, even if that does occur, no one is ready to throw away an existing business process, and there are many upstream systems that you'll experience from an integration perspective when you bring this sort of system online. So what we've done is make very consumable APIs for the blockchain, just interact with it with REST APIs, rather than some of the lower level frameworks. An enterprise wants to take an existing, say, application server, ESB, and just synchronize data with the blockchain in the simplest possible way. They don't want to understand all of the low-level details of the technology itself. Another thing that we've done that's been absolutely critical, but as a requirement you only really hit at the production pilot level is integrating secondary data stores. So we have a framework that sort of guarantees a hot but consistent synchronization of the data on the core blockchain system of record with secondary relational databases, which are optimized for different workloads. You know, you can't put an application online without a search page, without export CSV, without reporting facility. And so a lot of the work that we've done has been making that really smooth, where you would have to do that integration yourself if you didn't use our platform.
Casey, one of the things that Monex is doing is building up a library of IP around specific domains and the contracts and how you assemble the contracts and using higher level abstractions for doing that. Do you want to talk about what it's like to do a project on the Monex platform if you're, say, an insurance hub?
Sure. So one of the things that we've always been really focused on is how can legally regulated companies leverage this technology? And in order to do that, you really need to start, because blockchain is fundamentally about coordinating across companies, you need to start with the primitives from a legal domain that typically regulate these relationships right now. And so one of the things that we have very much focused on is building legal primitives in smart contracts that can be then mixed and matched and built as Lego bricks into higher and higher level abstractions and more complex assets if you were in the finance domain. And this has given us an ability to very quickly start turning around increasingly complex smart contract-based systems.
Okay, so let's go, starting with you, Casey.
Right.
What would you hope, obviously, we've all been a part of putting the EEA together, but what's your wish list for the EEA? What would you like to see the EEA accomplish over the next few months and years?
Same thing we joined at the beginning, which is we're very much interested in having a group of users that can work with the various vendors involved in the project to develop user-based standards. For us, we think that is the real key that this group and consortia will be able to accomplish.
Same question? Yeah. From the Block App's perspective, I think we totally agree on the standardization effort and hope to drive some of it. We collect a lot of requirements, and sometimes we've had to add to the protocol, and we'd like to push those additions back into the core protocol. I'd also like to see a happy business environment emerge. So the EEA is at least two tracks. There's technical, and then there are industry working groups, and where even in a commercial, proprietary case, the EEA might be able to custody an experience report setting industry standards, say at the smart contract level for particular transaction types, asset types, et cetera. And it's a good body for industry collaboration and should foster a pretty exciting business environment.
Yeah, I think very similar, but I would say make my life easier. Which means really help me make decisions on which platform, which modules, which technology I need to use for which use cases. I don't think we need to get to a single standard for everything. I think it's too aggressive to try to get there. But if we can have a standard for use cases and specific needs, I think that would make my life and my client's life way easier. So I think that would be my wish list.
Okay, so we have a few minutes left if there are any questions from the audience. All right.
We need the mic.
I think there's a mic.
We have all the
coming
mics.
around. No.
You have to come here.
I'll just scream.
Okay. Go ahead.
A quick one, right? So if you look at Fabric and Coda, they're sort of creating these flow architectures where the transactions are only visible to the parties that are actually interacting in them, right? So there's a concept of a flow API in Coda. There's a similar notion in Fabric. What's the plan for enterprise Ethereum to do something similar? Or are you going to take a different approach to maintaining your HCI?
Sure. Yeah. So let me start by saying I personally sit on our technical working group, which the output of which will be the protocol, and also say that the answer to that particular question is not fully agreed upon, but I think the general consensus is that we have as a reference point sort of the quorum security architecture as far as transaction privacy and what you've seen today, and probably that'll be the beginning of the protocol discussion, and from there, we'll share our experiences and come out with a spec in relatively short order.
I think the addition of zero-knowledge proofs and the ZSL capabilities into Quorum is another step forward, and sort of demonstrates why do it this way and why do it on Ethereum. Every time a new capability gets added into Ethereum, and there are many thousands of developers around the world adding capabilities to Ethereum, it gets added to the arsenal of tools that enterprises have to build their applications. So that's something that's really difficult to replicate in other technology platforms. And so I think that one of the next things that we're going to see added into this also is state channels as well, which not only addresses some transaction privacy requirements, but also some throughput and performance. So we've got those two elements. And I think one of the things to bear in mind that really sets Ethereum apart, and Ethereum is the basis for enterprise Ethereum, or NTETH, is the fact that most of these artifacts live on chain, or live in the chain. If you look at the architectures of both Corda and Fabric in detail, what you see very quickly is there isn't a chain, right? There's Kafka, or there's Corda, or what have you. And in particular, the code chain, in the case of Fabric, for example, is unrelated to the chain. Right? There's no synchronization of code chain logic. And so when you look at those architectures and you really get under the hoods, you see how disparate they are. And Ethereum gives us these clean abstractions from the VM into the smart contract layer, into the application layer, so that as we absorb these technologies, it's not a hodgepodge, right? I mean, it doesn't look anything like the Fabric piece. It looks very elegant by comparison.
Oh, hi, this is Karen from BlockCypher. Hi, Eric. Good to see you again. So going on your question, or going back to your question around having standards for specific use cases, I want to understand if you guys have talked a lot about integrating with existing standards, not for everything they do, but for the things that could be useful in the future, like HIPAA and HL7 for healthcare, or CORD for insurance, or FIX or FPML, so.
Well, I think that's where, to me, it's important to differentiate the technical standards and the business standards. Because what we are talking about here is more of the technical standards. We are not talking about changing HIPAA or changing how you treat PII or how do you manage securities in capital markets. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the technical aspect of it, and how do you define a smart contract, and how do we all agree what it's into a smart contract versus not. Those are more the technical, what I would call technical standards, and to me that's where we need to be spending more time. I'm not here to redefine the business standards. I don't think that's our goal here.
From our point of view, standards are important, but you have to understand why standards exist. For example, if a standard is a messaging standard, like you would have with Swift, for example, that may or may not have any relevance whatsoever to a blockchain. In other words, a transaction that's going through Swift needs to describe itself, which is a very different value proposition in many regards for what the private contract on a swap sale might be, going back to the Quorum demo before.
And I think one more point. I think maybe optimistic, but because we have this technology now, we have actually a chance to create new standards around things that we couldn't before because we didn't have the technology to do it, right? So now we have that notion of untrusted or trusted platform, whatever you look at it. Now you can create new standards, not only technology standards, but business standards. And that, to me, that's very exciting at a bigger picture, right?
So one comment is one of the guiding principles of the EEA that goes back, that's in some of our membership presentations, is to leverage other standards where applicable and not to reinvent the wheel. And also congratulations to Catherine to being a new EEA member wherever she went and sat down. I think we have time for one more question. So if we get one more question from the audience. Going once. Going twice.
We put them to sleep.
Yeah, well, I guess we did our
We
job.
need more zero-knowledge proofs up here, I think.
Well, thank you, everybody, for coming out, and we look forward to having you involved in our community.